What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained?
I had a phase in my mid-teens when I would read the obituaries in the local newspaper. I saw a name that was familiar as it was the same as a family friend. It had his full first, middle, and last names. I didn't say anything to my parents since I figured they already knew. A few days later my mom told me he died and I said I knew since I saw his obit. She said, "He died last night in his sleep." I went back through the newspapers. My mom kept them for a week before throwing them out, but the obit wasn't there. When the real obit came out it had his first and last name but just his middle initial. This was almost 40 years ago and I still think about it.
Early into my now wife and I's relationship I had a dream about her in childbirth. Very vivid and long. Like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic situations before, and I chalked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later and my wife is pregnant, I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. Which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year right when lockdown started. My wife is admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come showtime my wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible, but at this point I finally freak out into full panic, and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor I can tell wants to argue but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back and as I'm in the OR I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital, but before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan.
Man, this one hit me. I had vivid daydreams about my wife dying in childbirth through her whole pregnancy. She had to get induced 2 weeks early for high BP. After 18 hours of stalled labor they said they needed to do a C-section. After my daughter was born, my wife, who is a doctor, says, "Don't panic, but the D they just ordered, I'm bleeding out." We had long discussions before the birth that if a baby had to go to recovery I would go with the baby, no matter what. I told her I loved her and followed the baby. It was the longest hour of my life. My wife is healthy and fine. But she said she saw the look in my eyes that I truly believed I was saying goodbye and it broke her heart. Edit. Whoa. Did not accept this to over 1k upvotes. *** edit 2****. I'm shocked and rather appalled about the sentiment that my wife's life was somehow more important than my child's. And my only assumption is that the people saying this are not parents. And if they are, they have not gone through the extremely painful journey we did just to even conceive a baby. It's not just hormones that make us choose a baby. This is a conversation we had multiple times over the span of her pregnancy. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. I'm not going to try and explain the pure love of a father for his child, especially a baby. You won't get it. And I'm not saying my child's life is worth more than my wife. However, my wife, a fully grown very smart, doctor, woman made that choice. It was not a kill me to save my daughter, which she probably would say. It was a be with her so she knows she is loved and safe because there is nothing you can do to help me, as I am absolutely not a doctor. *** edit 3****. Some of y'all are just straight up sociopaths. I cannot fathom a world in which calling a baby, my own baby, an animal, is even remotely appropriate. or saying her life is worth less than the life of my wife.
Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave. He had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Edit. Believe it or not, I've never actually watched Final Destination. Now I have to see it.
Dom, that's freaky.
Super minor compared to many in this thread. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was across the country at my parents', driving back to theirs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back. But now I know I'm straight with all owls.
When the owls rise up asterisk and they will asterisk, you will be okay.
This didn't happen to me, but a very nice old man and his wife used to live a few streets over from us. Well, she got very sick and his son flew in to help watch and care for her. A few weeks later she moved to hospice and later died. The night she died, her husband and son drive home and they were talking about what to do for the funeral, and the husband asked, "Do you think she'd want some person to attend?" And they both said they heard the dead wife in the back seat say, "No thank you."
Ha ha, such a polite burn from a ghost. My buddy and I were playing tennis one night at some courts by my house. Lights usually went out at 11, but for whatever reason that night they went off at a weird time, like 10:43. Whatever, that was weird. We collected our stuff and started walking to my car about 500 feet from the courts. My buddy's mum pulls up right as we're getting to my car and goes, "Where the hell have you been?" I called your cell and some guy was just laughing, "It didn't sound like you." It was then my buddy realized he didn't have his phone on him. He told his mum to call his cell again and we could see it light up in the middle of the court we were playing on, by the net, but still definitely in between the single lines, not at all where we kept the rest of our stuff. He goes and gets it and only has the one missed call from his mum, the one she just made. He asked if she called the right number and her call log showed 3 calls to his phone all that night. We can't explain why the cell was on the court or what happened with the calls or what happened with the lights. It was surreal.
I have an idea of what may have happened, but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind, I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, if this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, "Did you knock that cereal onto the floor?" She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the F, man? However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position, just the box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right? Edit. My mother also told me, months before this happened, that she felt my father get in bed with her one night after he died. She said, "Go away, Greg. You're dead. You don't need to go to bed anymore." And she says she felt him get out of the bed after that. Weird. My mother despised my father by the end of his life, though they remained married. It's not surprising she told him to GTFO.
Your mom is a effing mad lad. She just said, no, to a ghost LMFAO.
The night my friend took his own life, I had a sudden urge to call him. I'm in Canada and he was in Atlanta at the time. I didn't call because I was out partying with friends and got the news the next day when I woke up. I feel like I missed the chance to save a friend, but my dad says it was him letting me know he was gone but was going to be okay. I'm sorry I didn't reach out, bud. I regret it all the time.
My mother died a day or two after my daughter's 5th birthday. I saw her in the day of the party. When I did and I was finally able to have a seat, I sat next to her and something didn't feel right. She had become very bloated and I told her. She said it was from her medicine and she was given water pills that would help. I still didn't feel right, but I was so preoccupied with the party that I didn't delve deeper. She had a heart attack. I was usually the one to push her or bring her to doctor visits, and I very much so regret not trying to that day or the next. I love and miss you every day. Heart.
My son, now 10, was 4 and was able to name my grandmother, by name, by a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. He said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. Context. His silly laugh, as we called it, was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh.
I was in the same position as your son, except mine was a jerk and would yell at me for something, can't remember now.
Not me, but my mother. She tells 2 stories. One time her doctor changed her blood pressure meds. It caused her to pass out on the kitchen floor. She had a near-death experience that's similar to what a lot of people describe. The tunnel of light, dead family members coming to see her, incredible feeling of joy, etc. My uncle, her brother, was maybe 10 years older than her. Back in the 60s, he had a boat and used to take it from Florida to the Bahamas. It was a trip he had made many times. One day he left in the boat and vanished. A short time after, she was at work, and her phone rang. It was a woman. "Is this Carol?" "Yes. I just wanted you to know that your brother died an honorable death." Then the woman hung up.
Holy poo. That last story is wild. Did you or your mom ever have any theories on what happened?
No, they never found him or the boat. Sometimes when she tells the story she mentions the Bermuda Triangle. But she says he was probably just robbed and murdered and the boat stolen. The phone call makes me think it was someone they knew though. I was out with my parents, and it was late coming back home. At around 2:30 a.m. we were at a traffic signal. A homeless guy comes and knocks on the window of the seat where my mother was sitting. As she rolled down the window to give him money, he said, "Check what is happening at your brother's house." He proceeded to take the money and walked away. Probably thinking that he was a bit crazy in the head, we didn't bother and went home. Next morning Mom gets a call from her brother's wife. He has had a heart attack. At 2:30 a.m.
Your mom was brave. I don't know if I'd have the guts to roll down the window at 2:30 a.m. for someone. I would like to think I would, but that seems too much like a recipe for a midnight carjacking.
When I was a kid, about 10 to 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while Mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Welp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Thanks for all the awards. I'll have to holler to the stairway ghost and let it know the internet loves it.
We had a stair ghost too. When my mum was heavily pregnant, she used to sit in front of the fire in the den with the dogs at her feet. One night, both dogs jerked awake and proceeded to watch someone climb the spiral staircase, but nobody was there. She's pretty sure it was her mum, checking that our bedroom, twins, was ready for us coming, because the dogs were calm, and she said she just felt this really reassuring presence. Fast forward 6-ish years and I woke up one night to find my mum sitting at the end of my bed and basically running a soothing hand up and down my leg. Said to her the next day that it was really nice, or something along those lines. I was young, and she was absolutely terrified because she didn't come into our room. My mum is the spitting image of her mum, so I'm guessing it was my gran soothing me back to sleep.
I live in a city and my brother lives in another city that is around 1,000 kilometers away. He visits sometimes but not quite often, on an average of once every 2 years. On one day around 7 years ago, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room at my apartment. I woke up suddenly on my brother sitting just beside me, and I was shocked, surprised, started greeting him and asking him about how is he doing and what pleasant surprise it was. Next thing I realized that this was a dream as the doorbell was ringing, which woke me. Went to open the door and guess what? It was my brother who came to surprise us. This literally had me speechless. Don't have any explanation, and I think sometimes you don't need to have one.
Maybe you heard his voice coming to the door. I incorporate sounds into dreams all of the time, and time is a weird thing in dreams. What feels like 30 minutes in a dream could be seconds. Just this morning, I incorporated the sound of a effing jackhammer into a dream until I realized that it was a real sound. I'm still pissed about the jackhammer this morning. F the city, jackhammering at 7 a.m. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures, posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam. 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual f***ck? At that point there was no information as to what had happened. So I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills.
I've had an experience just like this. Had a disturbing dream like that about someone who I hadn't talked to in months. Woke up in a panic at 3 a.m. Without knowing why, I just went and stood in the kitchen, then started crying. Found out later that day they overdosed in their kitchen at 3 a.m.
I was home alone in high school. It looked like car headlights were shining through our kitchen door, which didn't make sense because it was next to a field. I looked out the kitchen door and the lights were coming from about 50 feet off the ground. It was a row of 3 white lights and 1 red light. I opened the door and there was complete silence and the whole field was lit up. I closed the door quickly, turned around and it was gone.
I saw something similar during my evening jog. It was getting dark, and a shining light object fell into the woods nearby. I was approximately 20 meters away from it, and to this day I have no explanation for it. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened.
Imagine finally having a decent out-of-body experience and you end up at work instead of like, some tropical beach. Poor man astral planed into work while on vacation. That's some job dedication there.
Already posted this a year and a half ago, but I'll go again. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year I knew her whole family. Among these was her husband that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy, just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid, and after all these years spent Tokita he basically considered me as a grandson. Now back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there she looked at me and said in a sad tone, "Dave is inside there." Now if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said while still being half asleep, "Come on Dave, let me get back to sleep." Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. Also sorry for format and grammar, but I'm on mobile and English isn't my first language.
I had a similar experience after my brother died where I felt him sit on the side of my bed. It was dark but I could still make out his outline and I felt the bed shift under the weight of someone sitting on it. I was a young teen at the time and it terrified me, so I slid under the covers and said, "I love you, but can you please go away?" and then he disappeared. When I woke up in the morning my dad told me my brother had come to visit him in the night.
I have quite a few actually, but one that happened pretty recently stands out. I grew up in a very rural area. Mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap, but I believe there are things in this world better left alone and never went. Years pass, the house fell into disrepair and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward, my adrenaline spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go, but a few months later we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the faun from Pan's Labyrinth, just super tall with a wide head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again adrenaline kicked in and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yep." "Was it human?" "Nope." I refused to drive that road ever again.
My granddad died when I was 7, but, per his own words, I was his absolute favorite, partially because I am the splitting image of his mother, even into adulthood. When I was 21, I was set to give birth to my first son. I was about to get into the elevator to L&D when a man came in saying that he a volunteer and he'd help me and my husband find our way. The elevator was slow, but we spent the time talking about what a blessing children are and how they grow up so fast. Here's the thing. He looked and sounded exactly like my granddad, same stature, same blue-gray eyes, same faint Scottish-Canadian accent, same khakis, checked shirt, and sky-blue cardigan. Even spookier is that the nurses said they don't have any older male volunteers in that particular building. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I am absolutely certain Granddad paid me a visit that night.
My brother passed away in 2018 suddenly. About 3 weeks after I was having surgery on my hand, I was waking up from surgery and my brother was standing in the doorway. I started freaking out and the nurses were thinking I was in pain, but I couldn't tell them my dead brother is over there. He visited again when I was in labor last year. He told me he was so proud of me and that I can do it because I'm strong like a Viking. I was in labor on his birthday and gave birth at 1:12 a.m.
Well, when I was around 6 years old, I was walking down the stairs, no one was behind me, and all of a sudden I remember getting chills, then feeling a faint hand on my shoulder before I got basically pushed down the stairs. I was alright, a few cuts and bruises, nothing serious, but I still remember the feeling of the invisible hand on my shoulder. It haunts me.
I've had a really similar thing happen, though I didn't get pushed down the stairs. When I was 18-19 and still adjusting to life after high school, I remember being really lonely because all my friends had moved away to go to college and I was the only one who stayed in our hometown and went to community college, so I was also dealing with feeling less than because I didn't go to university right after high school. Definitely don't regret it now though. I remember just wishing that I had a companion or a friend who would just be with me when I was feeling especially sad or lonely, and every time I had that thought, I would feel a hand. It would be on my shoulder or my back, occasionally my lower back and even my thigh once or twice, but there was definitely something there. I could feel the weight and the warmth of it. It wasn't really scary after the first few times, I got used to it eventually. It also didn't feel malicious. It just felt like someone standing next to, behind me, putting their hand on me to comfort me. I always felt a little better, like I wasn't alone and everything was going to be okay. Eventually I made some new friends and the loneliness went away, and eventually so did the hands. I can still feel them occasionally when I'm driving alone at night and start to get creeped out by the dark and scary roads, or when I start to feel nervous about moving out of my childhood home next month. Sometimes I think it might be my great-grandpa, who died when I was 5 and is the only person I've known who has died, but I also like to think it could be someone who was just like me at some point and is just trying to comfort me in the way they wanted to be comforted when they were in my shoes.
When I was going to my family's home, I got in a SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV, the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun, and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. Edit, he just vanished. No blood. He was wearing ethnic attire which isn't peculiar around that area. He didn't speak at all, and we didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would be in the town my house was in. One thing that was weird was that he spoke in an oldish Bengali. Like a old Bengali that we'd see in poetry from the 1800s. I didn't see it as peculiar cause he seemed like an ascetic. Second edit, I have pics of the collision if you guys were wondering. Third edit, when I said he didn't speak at all, I meant during the ride. He didn't say anything other than where he wanted to go and insisting on my seat.
This made me mad for some reason. Imagine a hitchhiker begging for a ride only to demand shotgun. I'd be like, F off. Then I'd be killed by a bus.
As my great-grandfather passed away, my aunt and uncle had an unopened voicemail on their landline answering machine. As they listened to the voicemail, It sounded exactly like my great-grandpa saying, "God help me," before it faded off. The thing that trips me out the most is how my aunt and uncle requested a log of their incoming, outgoing calls, and there were no calls logged in that time frame. I've heard the voicemail. So bananas.
The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mum and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes, my mum or my sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink?" That was exactly how he'd ask my mum to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years now.
That's actually pretty sweet lol, he waited for her heart. I was about 15 and trying to sleep but having an asthma attack. Late in the night I started hearing a rhythmic breathing from the floor next to the bed. It wasn't scary, more comforting. And it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more effed up than that. It helped me calm down and get to sleep. Even though I was still sick, I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was that it had sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether a ghost dog came to visit me, or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me.
Greater than or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me. Sounds exactly like the thing dogs would do if they could time travel.
My siblings and I all had the same dream on the same night a year ago. It was exactly 1 year after my mum died and we all had a dream about her and she was in the same place and was speaking to us. She reassured us that she was okay and she was with her mum and my dead siblings and that her dad is in the bad place. The next day we all realized we had the same dream. We even all independently drew a picture of the place we saw her and wrote down the name of the place it resembled. Most of my siblings took that as an actual message from my mum, but my youngest sister and I like to believe that we have all developed some freaky hive mind low-level telepathy lol.
Not nearly as meaningful as yours, but in high school I experienced a really weird dream phenomenon. There was a girl I'd had a major crush on, but hadn't seen her in some time, and I had a dream she shaved her head. Next day in school my best friend tells me for whatever reason he had a weird dream that we were hanging out with this girl and she'd shaved her head. Okay, a little odd. But now it gets real odd. Being teenagers with nothing to do, we hang out at the local coffee shop a lot, so that night we go there, and lo and behold, there she is, with a damn shaved head. We nearly **** our pants. I could not believe it. It's so silly and stupid, but it made me wonder if there isn't some bigger fabric connecting us all, and the three of us tapped into it that night.
Was in college walking to class. Went to cross a busy street and a hand grabbed my shoulder, quite hard, and stopped me. A car zoomed by that would have killed me. Nobody was behind me or anywhere close enough to have stopped me. Guardian angel?
I've had near driving incidents like this, multiple times. It feels like something else just takes the wheel and swerves it, and I'm having a silent, oh, poo, moment as I jerk the wheel back in place. Invariably when someone else is with me, it's whoa, how did you miss that deer? Some other hazard that I somehow magically dodged and didn't notice at the time. I'd like to think that I caught it but didn't consciously register it, like the lizard brain we all have was dodging poo. But I don't know, still weird.
Very minor, but I still go, what the F? When I remember. When I was a kid, around 6, I lived in a very arid area, and a wide field of red dirt was between my house and my buds. Every day, walking over there, when I got about halfway across, I'd pick up a dirt clod or a small rock, and toss it behind me over my shoulder. About 10 seconds later, it would come flying back over my head and land in front of me. I'd just grin and keep walking. I remember this really distinctly, even trying to replicate it later in childhood after I'd moved away, and being sad that it didn't work anymore. Didn't question it as a kid, but looking back, just really weird. Also my job site is haunted, but this seems stranger.
Maybe there was a gopher there that was mad you kept chucking clods of dirt at him.
Had a premonition I'd be involved in a car accident one morning on the way to work as I got out of bed. It was a very strange thought and I considered taking an alternate route but did not. As I got onto the highway it was raining and a car flew past me, hydroplaned, and slammed into my car.
My mum had the premonition that my brother would not be safe when he was about to go on holiday. They were going to drive to Italy in his GF's car, what I can only describe as a yellow cookie jar with wheels underneath. She kept freaking out for a week, and the day before they left, she bought a second-hand VW Golf, not a big car, but way less tinfoil and with a decent cage construction, you know, German, Grundlichkeit, and send them on their way. She had to jump through hoops to get it insured in time, but the insurance agent could tell she was borderline hysterical at that point. Friday afternoon at 16:50, everything was about to close for the weekend, and made sure it happened. They took the car on Saturday morning and went on their way. Telephone rang 10 hours later, they got pancaked in a traffic jam in Switzerland. Car was totaled but they didn't have a scratch. She felt bad for informing insurance next Monday about what happened, really she wanted to let it slide and take the financial loss. You can ask for too much, you know? But as it wasn't my brother's fault, it got dealt with anyway. Needless to say she still is a big fan of VW. One night I had a dream about my grandpa, who had died almost 20 years prior. We were in his home, and he kept telling me, we need to clean the house, we need to get the house ready. When I asked him why, he just said, she's coming home. My grandma, his wife of 50 years, died the next day.
Lol, damn, he knew he was gonna get a talking to about how dirty the house was.
Oh, 100%. He was a very, very sweet, stubborn old man. My grandma was constantly getting after him for making messes, tracking mud into the house. Which makes the dream that much more legit.
In high school, I was getting peer pressured into doing something I didn't want to do, and would have gotten in a lot of trouble had a teacher come by, but I felt I didn't have a choice. I distinctly remember asking in my head, if I have a guardian angel right now, please effing pull the fire alarm or something. Asterisk asterisk, I kid you not, at that exact second asterisk asterisk, the fire alarm went off. This never happened at this school. It was so unlikely, I didn't expect it to actually happen. Nearly poo my pants. We immediately went to the assembly area along with the rest of the school, and I got out of the situation. Turns out at that moment someone in the school had accidentally triggered the fire alarm. I spent the rest of the day in shock, honestly. IDK if this counts as supernatural, but what even are the chances? That day introduced me to the idea of guardian angels, and I have had many similar occasions since then where just in the nick of time, I've gotten out of potentially extremely bad situations either due to insane luck, or the nudge of something looking out for me. Edit. The thing I didn't want to do was that my friends wanted to smoke up. I had strict parents and the school had very strict D policies, immediate expulsion. Also, I had never done AD before and was scared and very uncomfortable. I wish it was something cooler and less lame.
What was the thing you were going to do?
Not scary but still not explainable. When I was 22, I visited my grandma in her retirement home at Christmas. She was well, nothing out of the ordinary. A few days later I traveled to my then boyfriend across the country. 2 days after New Year's I woke up at 2 a.m. crying. And I just couldn't stop. I wasn't really sad or overly emotional, but the tears just kept streaming down my face. Nothing like that ever happened and I was kind of confused, as was my BF. I fell back asleep a few hours later. 3 days later I was informed that my grandma had died that night at about 2 a.m. Due to the divorce of my parents, communication was difficult and we were only informed after the funeral. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but it's hard to wrap my head around, especially since nothing like this ever happened again.
Something similar happened to me while I was in boot camp. I had a dream where my stepmom was talking to me, telling me everything was going to be okay, that my grandma loved me and I was going to get through this too. Woke up thinking that was weird. 2 days later I got a Red Cross message that my grandma had passed and the funeral had been the day I had the dream. That was so weird.
I have many, but here's the first that popped in my head. I was driving home from work after picking up my baby late at night. Not many cars around out on the country roads. The one stoplight out there was red for me, so I stop. It turns green and have a sudden voice or thought or whatever in my head saying don't go yet. Nothing is coming. I'm still sitting at the green light. Right as I let off the brake, a semi comes flying through his red light. I was shook.
Apparently we lived with a benign spirit in our house for 3.5 years. This is my mother's account of what happened because my sister and I didn't see anything at the time. Only my brother, his best friend and my mother saw it. Back when we were living in South Africa, we had moved into an apartment which we had bought. The moving in was actually quite eventful because a mother and her son were renting the place before, and although they had been notified, they decided to stay past the date that was given to them. I'm not really sure about the details to that, as I was around 7 or 8. Long story short, we moved in and started settling. After putting us to bed, my mother decided to stay up and watch TV. My brother was out with his friends. As she's watching whatever show was on at the time, she glances to our only plant in the house, which is about 1.5 meters tall, and sees a man roughly the same height as the plant standing under one of its leaves. Nopping out of that poo, she gets up and flicks the lights on. He's not there. Calling it a night, she goes to bed. The next day, or maybe 2 days later, I'm not sure on that detail, at breakfast my brother, who was around 16 at the time, picked up a piece of bread, turned around to the plant and said, "Hey Michael. Want some?" laughing. My mother asks him who Michael is, and he says Michael's the guy standing under the plant at night. Mind you, my mother didn't say anything to anyone about Michael, to not freak us out. My brother's best friend was also over that morning. We had basically unofficially adopted him, and my mother asks him if he sees Michael too, and he says yes. She then asks him to describe Michael, and he gives a perfect description down to the whites of his eyes. Michael apparently was a black young man around 1.40, 50 meters in height, wearing plain black trousers, a white button-down shirt, and a green vest. His skin tone was quite dark with a faint sheen to it. His eyes were also dark in violet, and the whites were tinted a bit yellow. He had a permanent smiling expression on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed put where he was, never moving but following you with his eyes. One morning my mum woke up to my dad coming home, who had bought this indoor circulating water thing. I really don't know what they're called. He moved the plant exactly opposite where it was, next to the couch, and put that water thing there instead. My mother didn't say anything, and that night Michael also moved with the plant. Of course, after hearing this, I asked the next logical question that any sane person would ask. Why the F didn't she just throw away the plant? She said it never occurred to her facepalm. So yeah, that is the story of Michael, the benign smiling spirit that was a part of our family for some time. Edit: I had drawn the basic layout of our living room, but it looked completely effed up when posted. So I erased it. Oh well. Edit 2, just spoke to my mother. She said Michael's eyes weren't dark but a dark honey color. How I forgot such a creepy detail is beyond me. But there you have it.
Greater than he had a permanent smiling expression on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed put where he was, never moving but following you with his eyes. Terrifying. Red luminescent ball, flying on the horizon. It moved like nothing we'd ever seen, zipping around at incredible speed that defied the laws of physics. There were about 20 of us watching it, and some of the kids asked me what I thought it was, as I grew up living and breathing aviation with my dad. I had to tell them that since I couldn't identify what it was, that it was essentially a UFO. Had to then explain that it doesn't mean aliens, just that what we saw couldn't be identified by any knowledge I had of aircraft, not then, and not even now. It could have been ball lighting for all I knew at the time, but it was kilometers away above the horizon in the dusk sunlight.
A family friend of ours, Gary, was terminally ill with cancer. He was a father figure to me and one of the few adult males from my previous life. I am a recovering alcoholic that fully understood me. A friend and myself were in Moab, UT, and found a hostel to sleep in for the night. I had a dream about Gary. He looked amazing, completely healthy and backlit, and was wearing a multicolored sweater. He looked at me with concern in his eyes, pointed backwards, and said, "I'm not doing too good." I woke up a bit shaken because it felt surreal. I told my girlfriend about the dream, and she asked if I needed to call my mom to see how he was doing. I told her that it wasn't necessary because I knew they would call me if Gary passed. That day we drove from Utah to Colorado and stayed in another hotel. About 5 a.m. I woke up and my phone was ringing. I could see that it was my mom, and I already knew what she was going to tell me. She broke the news that Gary had passed, and I basically explained to her that Gary came and told me goodbye. I'm tearing up IRL right now writing this. The picture that his wife picked for his obituary was Gary in that multicolored sweater he was wearing when he came to me in my dream.
I have a similar story about my mum who passed away from cancer. In her last few days she was very weak and basically sleeping all the time. I had a dream where it was me and her sitting at our dinner table in my childhood house. She was wearing all white and looked about 40 years younger. She was asking me about my future and my goals. Then she looked at me and smiled and said, "Well, it's time for me to go now," and got up from the table and walked upstairs. I woke up crying because it all seemed so real, and I knew that what she said was significant. She passed away the next morning in her sleep.
When I was 12, I woke up with a start at 2:30 in the morning. I wasn't dreaming and didn't know why I woke up. My parents told me the next morning that my grandfather had had a heart attack and went for emergency surgery. He died at 2:30 in the morning.
My cousin told me the same story when his father died. He said he had a moment where he just got massive chills and a feeling of being overwhelmed that lasted for about 10 seconds, only to get a call 10 minutes later that his father had just passed away.
There's a story from when I was approximately 4 to 5 years old. My grandmother was looking through old family photos and asking me who the people were. We got to a picture of my grandfather, and she asked me who he was, and I said, Poppy Jim. He died suddenly at home when my mother was 10, in the same house we lived in, so I never met him. She asked me how I knew that. I told her, oh, he comes and tucks me in and tells me he loves me sometimes after you go to bed.
My sister has a similar story. She was 4 years old, our mum was showing her family photos. Sister pointed on the photo of our great-grandfather who died 2 years prior to her birth and told Mum she knows him because he sometimes sits on the couch in the living room at Grandma's house, and once he wanted to give her a cookie. My mum asked her to describe it. She said it was a marmalade-filled butter cookie. There's no way she knew that's the exact kind of cookies our great-grandpa used to give everyone in the family. My sister is 39 now and she doesn't remember it at all. Our mum is the only one who does.
I had a dream at age 9 where I was walking through an alleyway with another boy, who I didn't know at the time, having a conversation about school grades or something. 2 years later I meet this boy, and turns out he's a friend of my brother who's a year older than me, but it still didn't hit me yet that he was the one I was walking with in my dream. Another 3 years pass, we are now in high school, and all three of us are walking through the usual alleyway that we passed through to get home. Then a conversation about school grades pop up and I get hit with the biggest realization and feeling of déjà vu ever. I was reliving the dream that occurred 5 years prior, and my memory of that dream became very vivid at that moment. They thought I was a MF wizard predicting what they were gonna say a second before they speak. This happened 8 months ago. It was great.
I dreamed the sequel to The Matrix years before it came out. I don't even think it had been announced yet. But that scene where Neo fights a Jillian Smiths in the playground? I had explained it in detail to my wife after I had the dream, and we were both kind of taken aback seeing it on the screen. What a useless glimpse of the future, rolling on the floor laughing.
Did you also dream the ridiculously long sex scene? Watching that in theaters with my dad at 15 years old was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my adolescence.
We had a kitten-producing cat when I was about 6 or 7 years old. We knew it had kittens since it was pregnant for a while and then wasn't. We had no idea where the kittens were, which was an issue. I was curious about it and looked right at the cat, thinking to myself, where are your kittens? But without saying anything, if that makes sense. My imagination immediately went to the location. Our cat could jump into it from pillars on the side of the porch through some damaged boards right above our porch. I knew they were around. I dashed over there, mounted the stone pillar, and peered through the gap in the boards. The kittens were right in front of me. I've never experienced another event like it in my entire life.
I had a similar experience. When I was a kid, we used to have gerbils and they would often escape their cages. One time we just couldn't find one of them and eventually we gave up, and my parents figured he crawled into a wall or something. I went off to bed but couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that the gerbil was sitting in a toy car that I already checked at least twice. So I went downstairs and told my parents that I knew where the gerbil was. I walked all the way across the room, opened up our toy box, hunted around for the toy car, and when I opened it up, there was the gerbil, exactly where I had imagined him to be. Maybe a coincidence, but the certainty that I knew exactly where I would find him was a strange experience.
I had a sort of demonic mask on my shelf, and one day while I was working at my desk no more than 4 feet away from it, it just flew off the shelf and shattered on the floor. It didn't just fall off the shelf, it was like someone threw it across the room. The baffling part to me is that I am the one who made the mask. So I know it's not cursed by some voodoo hex or something.
Unless you're cursed by some voodoo hex or something.
When I was 9 or 10, it was a bad year. I was regularly physically and emotionally abused. But that year, I was sexually abused. On top of all that, I started having serious mental health issues. Well, when things were at their absolute worst, I started having dreams of this blonde lady telling me to hold on. That things would get better. It was so comforting and peaceful and continued as long as the extreme abuse continued. I didn't know who she was, I just figured I imagined her. Well, things finally simmer down, and the dreams stop. About a year later, Mum was going through old photo albums, and my blood freezes. I see the blonde woman from my dreams. I ask who she is. Turns out, it was an aunt I had who died shortly before I was born. Edit, holy hell, thank you everyone for the kindness you all have shown. I'm tearing up. I didn't expect that. I'm almost 40 now, it was a long time ago. I still have scars, but I was lucky enough to get therapy when I got free from my family. Things aren't great, but they're much improved and I have no complaints, and that's enough for me. Thank you all.
Damn. See, your aunt was there for you. I hope you are doing better now.
Ty, much better.
I've had extremely vivid dreams of relatively inconsequential moments in my future life that I nonetheless keep locked away in a little corner of my head, and then when those moments actually occur, I get insane déjà vu that throws me off until I remember the dreams. It's a very bizarre thing, but it ultimately doesn't mean much to me. And edit, since this seems to have blown up. Thank you everyone for sharing your similar experiences with this. And also thank you to those of you attempting to explain what could be going on when the events occur, no matter your stance on it. It's fascinating reading some of the details on what might cause it, or whether it's just some trick of the mind. It's very informative.
I once went to open a cupboard in the kitchen and had a déjà vu feeling. I froze and remembered the moment vividly and knew that a mug would fall when I opened the cupboard. I held my hand out and opened it and the mug fell directly into my hand. I felt badass. Thought I had superpowers for a day or so.
So I was too young to remember this firsthand, and we moved to a new house a month before I turned 2 years old, to give you an idea of how young, but my parents told me that when we lived in our first house I would absolutely not go into my bedroom. I would put my hands and feet across the doorframe and scream bloody murder, and no matter how hard my parents tried they could not get me into that room. One time my parents must have managed to actually get me in there, and I was crying my eyes out. My mum asks me what the matter was, and apparently I just pointed to the corner and said, "Funny man. Funny man in the corner." My parents let me stay in their room after that apparently.
Yeah, when I was about that age, my family dog, who was basically my best friend and protector until she died, had a thing. This is according to my parents. Suddenly, whatever we were doing, our heads would snap up to the staircase and the dog would get in front of me and start growling, which was very unlike her. Then our eyes would track something coming down the stairs, then it would just vanish and we'd both return to rolling about like idiots, or whatever it is toddlers and their dogs do. Used to scare the poo out of my parents.
I give both our parents credit for not yeeting us through a window, cause I certainly would. F that entirely.
Woke up one in the middle of the night to a man standing next to the bed staring at my so. He was slightly translucent and I figured it was just another sleep paralysis episode. Had them before, so knew the drill, and rolled over and went to go back to sleep. Normally being able to move isn't part of sleep paralysis, and immediately my heart began to race as I realized I need to roll over and check what I saw. Person was still standing there, staring at my so, then he made eye contact with me. Stared at me for a while before turning around and walking to the wall, slowly fading away with each step. Next morning So wakes up looking like poo and said she had the worst night's sleep because she kept having the feeling that someone was watching her. Glad we no longer live in that house.
What did the person look like other than being translucent? Did it look otherwise human?
Perfectly normal adult male. Nothing strange at all. It was so vivid I could give a detailed enough description that a forensics artist could draw.
Woke up, needed to pee, went back to my room and there was a thing next to my bed. I remember it was very dark and spindly, shaped almost like Gollum, and its legs bent backwards and it seemed to have wisps of shadow coming off of it. I just stared at it for a few seconds before a woman's voice told me, "This isn't for you to see, you should go get a glass of water." So I turned my ass around and went to get a glass of water. I was in the kitchen, now awake enough to think it through, and convinced myself that it was our black fluffy cat. But then when I went back to my room and saw that my parents' door was closed, and remembered that they'd taken that cat in with them. I also remembered that I've seen that cat in the darkness before, and it doesn't look like weird Gollum, it looks like a bowling ball with stub feet. So then I assumed I just dreamed it. Well, when I got back to my room, the book that I'd been reading before bed and had left on the pillow next to me was sitting in the middle of my bedroom floor. I've told this story before on Reddit and someone told me that they've seen the golem critter too. I believe they said it was under their bed and that it had a lot of teeth.
It's kind of weirdly polite that it was just like, hey bro, you should come back in a few minutes. Why don't you go hydrate real quick while I finish this up? Lol.
Exactly the impression I got, lol. Let me handle this one, kiddo. Go get a lil drinky drink.
Our 17 dog was euthanized last year, miss her. I purged the house of all her stuff, donating all to a local shelter. The other day I was in my room, started thinking about her and cried some. I looked at her picture a while, then noticed some piece of paper on the floor. It was receipt from the pet shop 2 years ago for dog treats. I'm puzzled because I have no idea where it came from. I don't save receipts and yet there it was laying in the middle of the floor in my room.
I'd like to think that she really enjoyed those treats in particular and this was her way of saying, thank you.
I saw a effing demon sitting on a tree. I was like 12 to 13 and walked home minding my business when I noticed something big and black like 5 meters up sitting on a branch. I looked up and this thing looking like a gargoyle hisses at me and disappeared. I thought I hallucinated, but there were sticks falling right where this effer sat 12 years later and I still have no effing clue if it was real or I am dumb.
It could have been George McFly, peering at Lorraine.
My dad was a painter who passed away of cancer. Before he died he talked about God letting him paint the skies. The day he died there was a giant pink cloud that looked just like an angel. Edit. Here is a picture of the cloud. Link.
Me and my friend used to think we were amateur ghost hunters. One day we were hunting ghost in his house, which had been owned by several families over the years. It was me, him and his sister. We would take turns holding the camera and asking questions to the potential spirits in the room. As we rewatched the footage we noticed at one point none of us were holding the camera. We were all in the shot together and the camera wasn't placed or mounted but was capturing us as if someone else was holding it.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.